Hey everyone, welcome to Facts. I hope you're having a wonderful day. What we're going to do today is talk about and learn about leavening agents. So I know that sounds really weird, leavening, if you want to try to say it, leavening agents. In your Schoology folder, you see a paper that says leavening agents PDF. So I'm going to be working through that paper with you, and I'm also going to be preparing your Irish soda bread recipe that's in that folder as well. So I'm going to read to you that little paragraph to start, and then we'll get started on our recipe. Leavening refers to any agent that makes bread or dough rise and expand. They create pockets of air or carbon dioxide that are held within the fat and other ingredients of a batter or dough. When exposed to high heat, obviously your oven, these pockets release steam and evaporate, causing the ingredients to rise, leaving behind tiny holes in the baked good. In most cases, if leavening is left out of a recipe, the final product becomes very dense. Who wants flat pancakes? Not me. All right, so we're going to talk about your leavening agents, and while we prepare your Irish soda bread recipe, so in your folder, you will see a recipe for soda bread. So this is like a super easy, very easy recipe, very simple. So just so you can see how bread rises. If you look at the recipe, the yield is 6, so that means it makes 6 mini breads. Looking at the ingredients, you need flour, you need salt, you need a baking soda, which is your leavening agent. Then you need craisins or raisins. I'm going to use craisins, which are dried cranberries. And then lastly, you need 1 cup of buttermilk. So let's get started. Your recipe is broken down into 2 different days, but obviously you can make this in 1 day, but if we were in class, we'd break it into 2 days, and I'll explain why. So let's get started first. You need a mixing bowl. The first ingredient on your list is flour. So you need your 1 cup, and you need to do it twice. So remember to lightly spoon your flour in the bowl or in your measuring cup. Don't scoop it, because then you'll pack your flour down. So lightly spoon it in. And then what tool do you need to level that off? Straight edge spatula. Good job. I hope you said that. So level it off. There you are. 1 cup is in your mixing bowl, and now you have to do it 1 more time. Lightly spoon, lightly spoon. Okay. And then level off again. There we are. Okay, so you can put your flour away. The next ingredient going right down the list so you don't miss any or leave any out is salt. So that one's easy. You need 1 TSP, which is a teaspoon. So scoop that in and level off. 1 TSP in the bowl. Next, we need our leavening agent. So in this recipe, baking soda is what's going to make your bread rise, okay? So leavening agents, there's 3 of them. Baking soda and baking powder. Baking soda and baking powder, if you're using these in a recipe, you should always know that the recipe is considered a quick bread, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the third leavening agent, which we'll use for your cinnamon rolls, is yeast, okay? So back to your leavening agent. Unlike the first day of class, we talked about how important it is to measure perfectly, especially when you're baking. So for your leavening agents, if you don't measure this super perfect and accurate, then you might throw off the reaction that's going to happen once you start mixing these and they go into the oven. So your recipe calls for 1 TSP. So is that a teaspoon or a tablespoon? It is a teaspoon. Good job. So your baking soda is cool because it has this little thing right there, the edge, so that you can level it off coming right out of the can. If you get a big chunk taken out, dump it in and do it again. But this one came out nice and perfect. So put your teaspoon into the bowl. And then you're just going to use that spoon that you lightly spoon your flour in to mix that up. All right, so your dry ingredients are in the bowl. Next, we need our craisins and our raisins, whichever you pick. I like craisins. You can even do fresh blueberries if you'd like. I've had students use chocolate chips if you want it a little bit sweeter, but craisins are nice. Dried cranberries are nice, sweet, but a little bit tart too. So your recipe says that you need 3/4 of a cup. Do you remember what 2 cups make up 3/4? Do you remember? It is a 1/2 and a 1/4. If you said that, good job. So just scoop that in. You're not going to be able to level these ones off, but just do your best. If you have an extra craisin or 2, it'll be just fine. All right, 3/4 cup is in, and you can give that another little mix. That's totally fine. So right now the baking soda isn't doing anything. It's just sitting in the bowl. It's not activated. It's not working yet in your recipe. The ingredient that's going to activate this is your liquid ingredient. And in this recipe, it is your buttermilk. So it might be water, it might be milk in a recipe, but for this recipe, it is buttermilk. So buttermilk is probably something you don't have in your kitchen, but it's so easy to make. So what you do is get your, what's this called? Liquid measuring cup, and do your kitchen aerobics and measure 1 cup of whatever milk you have at home. You can use 1%, 2%, almond milk, coconut milk, lactate free, whatever milk you have, you can use that milk. So measure 1 cup. Don't forget to do your kitchen aerobics and measure at eye level. And then what you do is add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. So what you do that right away. So I did that before I even started the video, and I let it sit. You gotta let it sit for about 7 minutes. So do it way before you start the recipe. So that way when your recipe calls for the buttermilk, you can add it in and it's buttermilk. So you have to let that sit there though, at least for 5 to 7 minutes. That way that reaction can happen. So it's been setting for quite some time. Before you add your liquid ingredients, what you want to do is create a well in the bottom. So what that means is you move all the little dry ingredients around. I can't lift the bowl up and show you or my ingredients will move, but just move them around. And then when you add the liquid ingredient, you want to pour it right in the middle. All right, and then when you mix it, remember it's a quick bread. So what that means is you don't want to undermix, but you don't want to overmix either. Because if you overmix, you're going to overwork the reaction, and then you're going to have all of the carbon dioxide bubble off into the air, and you're going to get flat or dense Irish soda bread, and you don't want that. So Alton Brown, who's like my favorite food science guy ever, he says when you mix a quick bread, you just keep mixing and you count to 10 as slow as you can, and then that's about how long you should mix it. So I'm gonna mix. I'm gonna mix and you count to 10 really slowly, and we'll see if we get done at the same time. 8, 9, 10. Alright, if you get to 10 and there's still a few dry ingredients around, you can mix it up just a tiny bit more, but you can see you're not mixing it for like a whole minute. It's like maybe 25 seconds. So definitely keep mixing if you see some dry ingredients because you want to get those mixed in. So what's happening right now is your baking soda, your leavening agent, and your buttermilk they come together and they create a product of carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide now is going to start rising up in your batter, and then as it's in the oven, it's rising, but now it's baking, so those holes, the little air pockets, are going to stay there. So to get these onto your baking sheet with your sill pad, and P.S. I have the oven preheating to 425 degrees, so it's pretty hot. Remember, preheat your oven usually about the first step because it takes about 10 minutes. So our yield is 6. So what your goal is to try to get 6 out onto your baking sheet. So scoop with one and then you scrape with the other. Let's see if you can move it down. Okay. Scoop and scrape. So, number one thing when you're baking, whether it's biscuits, cookies, no matter what it is, you want to make sure that they're the same size, because when they're the same size, they'll bake the same way. What you don't want is one really small and one really big, because then that little small one, he'll burn before the big one's finished, and who wants anything burnt? Not me. So, scoop and scrape, and then, before you move to the next step, always check them. Okay, so I think if you think one's bigger than the other, just take your spoon and kind of take one from one and add it to the other. But right now, I think these are pretty good. Your next step, what you're going to do is take your straight edge spatula and you're going to put a little X in the top of all of them, like this. All right, so next, we need to put these into the oven. Your recipe says for 11 to 12 minutes. So if you remember from class, how long should we set the timer for a recipe that we've never made before? Always the lowest amount of time, because your recipe is saying you need at least 11 minutes, but it might need an extra minute depending on your oven. So I'm going to put these in the oven for 11 minutes. And then we'll check them. Okay, so give me 1 second and I'll meet you at the oven. So now in your Schoology folder, you will see the leavening agents paper. I read you the first paragraph, but if you were to flip your paper over, we'll go through these answers quick while your soda bread's in the oven. I'll talk more about your 3 leavening agents. Okay, so number 1, these 2 leavening agents are always used in quick breads, and those 2 are baking soda and baking powder. Okay, you've probably used these in recipes, but maybe you didn't know what they were in there for. You'll always use them in cookies, so you've probably made cookies at home before and you've used one of these or a combination of these. In a quick bread recipe, use either this, like we just did in our soda bread. Baking powder will be in your biscuits, and then, but if something for like chocolate chip cookies, you use both of these. So in a quick bread, you're going to use one of these or a combination of the 2. And remember, when it's a quick bread, what it's telling you is that reaction is going to happen pretty quickly. So if we were to mix up that soda bread and we just left it in the mixing bowl for about 20 minutes and then we continued to put it onto our baking sheet, what would happen is that carbon dioxide that gets created from your leavening agent reacting with your liquid ingredient, that carbon dioxide bubbles off into the air. So then if you were to put them on your baking sheet and put them in the oven, and the reaction has already happened, you're going to get flat biscuits or bread or cookies, whatever it may be. So that's why it's called a quick bread, and you have to be sure that you don't under or over mix. So counting to 10 slowly is something that you do for all quick breads, whether it's biscuits, which we will do, or pancakes, which we'll make in 8th grade. So there's that. Number 2, this leavening agent is used in yeast breads. That's an easy one. That is yeast. So it comes in a big container like this. You can buy it in the grocery store in smaller little packets. In our kitchens, it's in your container like this. So yeast, it is alive right now. In this container, it's a single-celled organism, so it is alive, very tiny. It's not moving or anything right now. It's considered dormant or sleeping. So in order for you to wake it up or activate it so that it makes your recipes rise, you need to mix it with water, okay? But not just any water, it needs to be warm water. So what I think is warm and what you think is warm might be two different things. So there's a perfect little range, and that degree range is 101 to 111 degrees Fahrenheit. So if your water's in that range and you add your yeast to the recipe, it'll wake up and it will be happy and it will make you some great baked products. So we'll use this in your cinnamon rolls. You can use this yeast in pizza or donuts or soft pretzels. So that is your yeast. If you were to boil the water, so do you know what temperature water boils at? 212 degrees. So if you were to boil your water, that's like way too hot for your yeast, and you would actually, what do you think happens to the yeast if your water is way too hot? Remember, it's alive. Right, you would kill the yeast. You would kill the yeast, and you don't want to kill the yeast. And if your water was too cold, what do you think happens to the yeast? Nothing. You won't wake it up. It'll never wake up with cold water. So whether the water's too cold or the water's too hot, you won't activate your yeast, and you'll have flat, dense cinnamon rolls or whatever your recipe was with the yeast. Okay, so if you don't have a food thermometer at home, what you can do is test it on the back of your wrist here, because if the water's too hot for the back of your wrist, it's probably too hot for the yeast, because this is the most sensitive area of your hand. So you can always test it there if you don't have a food thermometer. Number 7, which leavening agent requires kneading. So what that is yeast, and you'll get to knead the dough when we make cinnamon rolls, okay? So that's all about your leavening agents. You'll get to use all 3 of your leavening agents throughout our rotation if you choose to make the recipes. All right, so I will see you when the bread comes out of the oven. Okay, so I just got our Irish soda bread out of the oven. Make sure you put it on a pot holder. You don't want to set it right on your counter or on your table because it will burn. So what you want to do is let them sit on there for just, 30 seconds to a minute, and then use a spatula to transfer them to your cooling rack. And you can eat them nice and warm. They're really great with a little bit of butter on there, or you can eat them plain. So what I want you to do, if you choose to make these at home, is take a bite. I'm going to cut one open. But what I want you to look for is the air pockets, because remember, we want to see how the bread rises. So, if you can see, you want to look for air pockets, and that's where your bread was rising from the carbon dioxide, but it was baking, so it baked into bread, and that's how those air pockets stay there. So, enjoy if you make them at home. If not, maybe we can make them together, but enjoy. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great day.